back home to Africa. Come back home. Da, 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 da.
Divine all blessed, divine all blessed, divine all blessed. My live listening and calling number is area code 563 999 3763. 563 area code 999 3763. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Welcome, welcome, divine, all blessed peace and love, joy and prosperity, elevation, revelations, and manifestation. You are now listening live to the Divine Prince, Pan-African Spiritualist, Practitioner, author, and advisor, Elagun Oloye Hoodoo Obeah Bokor, sharing with you in all things spiritual, mystical, metaphysical, cosmic, universal, evolutionary, revolutionary, healing, and holistic from a Pan-African Hoodoo world spiritualist perspective. Understanding that all is truly and indeed a blessing if you can just see beyond the veils, for it is all just an illusion and a test and one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. This is my constant prayer, my mantra, affirmation, reverberation. It is my reiteration and my ever living reality. All is a blessing, is crucial to the very foundation of my understanding, my teaching, my walk, my work along this divine, all blessed life path and journey. It is how I, Prince, make sense out of all that we're challenged with here in our daily existence on Mother, Father, Earth. And it is my personal place of power and understanding, the place from where I begin, the place from where I crystallize and realize all my endeavors, understanding that I and I alone create and co-create my divine destiny, and I alone create and co-create my divine, all blessed reality. And so it is. Ashe, Asheo, and Ashe. Greetings and salutations to each and every one of you listening and viewing here with me in social media, in YouTube, on Blog Talk Radio, and certainly my international listening audience by way of Blog Talk Radio call-in listening number, area code 563 999 3763. Hoodoo, conjure, root work, and revolution. Hoodoo, conjure, root work, and resistance. Based on the evidence that I've been sharing over the last several podcasts derived from trial records, slave narratives, interviews, autobiographies, and other sources, a composite sketch of the typical slave conjurer can be drawn. Conjurers were often isolated ascetics, living on the margins of slave community and wrapped in mystery. Their elevated status on the plantation and their mastery over mystical forces made them simultaneously feared and respected. These spiritualists claim to possess a variety of supernatural powers, including the ability to communicate with the spirit world and the power to heal the sick. And many claim possession of second sight or third eye vision, the ability to foretell future events through interpreting visions and dreams, the ability to see beyond the veils. So their command of esoteric forces and otherworldly knowledge allowed them to gain influence over the enslaved, which resulted in conjurers playing central roles in various acts of slave resistance. In terms of their collective belief in conjure and magic, North American slaves shared similar cultural experiences with Africans throughout the Atlantic world, the Pan African diasporic world, as we've come to know it today, which firmly situates the North American slave experience into context with other diasporic slave societies, while underscoring the notion that far from being accommodationist, North American conjurers were vital in the creation of revolutionary consciousness among fellow enslaved Africans. Revolutionary consciousness. So, indeed, we met the needs, often the wants and the desires of everyday experience, everyday living. But certainly, we never lost sight of revolution, resistance, freedom, if you will. And so the decided choice to demonize, appropriate, bastardize voodoo based traditions, and certainly all Aboriginal, indigenous based spirituality and tradition, but certainly voodoo for its vital role in the very building blocks of so called American culture and American society. Let's not forget the Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the US or the colonial colonies of that time. And so the fear, the apprehension of, the respect of, and the legends in relation to voodoo with four O's, root work, conjure, and supposed acts of witchcraft by the savage populace traveled up the superhighway that at one time was the Mississippi River. Before we had, Highway 66 and a well-developed system of highways throughout the intercontinental U.S., we certainly had the Mississippi River, one of the main ports for deriving cargo, enslaved populace, but also food stuff, cotton. Certainly, oil became a central material product carried up the Mississippi River. And so too the legends and the stories about voodoo, hoodoo, conjure, certainly Dr. John and Marie Laveau. So the white supremacist, racist, propagandist prejudice that still exists around voodoo, and particularly voodoo with four O's, is still alive today. And it's really all of our responsibility, those of us who claim connection to these practices and traditions, who claim connection to this ancestry, to re educate ourselves and the community, starting with our peer groups around us, about the truth of these practices. It doesn't mean everybody needs to be in your business, but we certainly need to bring the cultural, spiritual, religious traditions out in the open in a public space, particularly this superhighway of internet that we now participate in one form or another. We're certainly sharing space with traditions, religions, philosophies that ultimately work against us and do not work in our favor. And we've discussed in previous shows the roots of racism, white supremacy, certainly back to the motherland, but ingrained in documentation in Haiti, Haitian culture, the Haitian Revolution, and how our accessing spirit was ultimately described in literary works for which many still today pull their so-called understanding of what this is from. So I'm going to share with you facts about the racist history of voodoo 4 O's. The term voodoo for O's has its roots in West Africa. It comes from the word spirit in the Fon language. Fon language, not French, Fon language. The French use the term Vaudaux, which eventually morphed into the anglicized Voodoo to refer to a variety of African spiritual practices. I often state that voodoo is an umbrella word, not just for what's going on in Louisiana, or what's going on in Haiti, but certainly the Pan African diasporic footprint of the tradition globally. So, to refer to a variety of African spiritual practices and traditions, I often say voodoo with four O's, which they typically regarded as superstitions, barbaric, savage practices, uh, in the colonies of the Americas. So in Haiti and in the Haitian diaspora, devotees of the religion that is commonly referred to as voodoo with four O's typically do not use this term. Haiti, Haitian diasporic members, and certainly now French, Francophone, Creolized colonies now use in describing voodoo. And the fact that scholars and devotees, such as myself, continue to use voodoo with four O's is a very intentional act. It is in itself a revolutionary act. Scholars and devotees created a campaign to have the US Library of Congress change the entire entry of labels for voodoo, Voodoo, and voodooism to voodoo, Vodou. My issue with that is it negates, which we now have a well documented footprint, the validity of the practice in the Black, Indigenous, Aboriginal, and African American communities from the time of enslavement until today. Most well known North American and European media outlets have started using VODOU instead of VOODOO to be politically correct and to appease those who would otherwise argue that voodoo somehow was created in Haiti or voodoo is somehow Haitian at its root, which again not only negates our footprint in the practice and the tradition, but also that of the motherland that in West Africa. I've even heard some Lukumi practitioners claim their system is somehow more pure and intact than what is happening in Europe today. Again, I offer that these prejudices are political, social, financial in many cases. There's a well walked path to traditional ceremony and initiation, certainly in Central and South America and in Africa, certainly Nigeria. But there's also a well documented path of tourism to the same locations. And when put in a predicament, certainly the indigenous and the aboriginal will claim that even the best of African American visitors have only received something that's tourist and that is not authentic, organic, to be respected globally in the Pan African diaspora in terms of our dedication, commitment to these practices and these traditions. I'm not here to reshuffle the deck, and I'm not here to argue that. I'm here to argue that we have what belongs to us. What is for me is for me. What is for me is already standing up in the very Jacob's ladder, the very DNA coding of ancestral memory that exists in our DNA. I saw a trending, greatly, wonderfully trending video earlier today about that very thing by a well-known Black actor. But he's using new language for it. But the Goddess Initiative and the Good Doctor and many others who are listening to me now know I've been saying this since 1996, that ancestral memory survives in the blood, survives in the DNA. It is certainly an archive. It is certainly in copyrighted Blog Talk Radio, copyrighted written documentation that I've been saying this since at least 1996, when I first came into this world wide web of internet space. So before the Civil War, most people in the United States had probably never even heard of voodoo before O's. But after the Union Army seized New Orleans, newspapers across the country began to print stories about the voodoo, the practice that was supposedly common among Black people in Louisiana and the rest of the US South. We know that the influx of some upwards of 40% of that Creole elite populace that fled Haiti to Louisiana also helped to increase both the awareness but also the fear of the practice, and in many cases, the bastardization of the practice, as they were devoutly Catholic, in some cases, devoutly Protestant, devoutly religious, and if not religious, certainly capitalist, certainly nationalist at the time, understanding that the Creole populace governed Louisiana at this time. And so they certainly painted the picture for the hunter and not for the lion. So after our city was seized, negative propaganda flooded certainly the US, but the world in relationship to voodoo. And we know it was fueled now by its effect on creating revolution, for its ability to create resistance, for its ability to create the only successful uprising this side of the globe, the Haitian Revolution. And we owe that to the practice of voodoo and Bois understanding that, there were a plethora of ethnic groups represented in the Haitian colonies of that time that would have also had a voice, a footprint, leaned a practice into what Bois successfully became. And I'm here to say, like a ripe pomegranate, okay, the seeds of that revolution carried, even with a resentful, literate Haitian populace, to survive to today in documented material that we can share, that we can explore. Voodoo, the history of a racial slur. People who oppose emancipation and the extension of voting rights to people of African descent use such stories to argue that Black people were too superstitious to be granted these rights and freedoms. So certainly the wedge of religion, Christianity and its Catholic and Protestant forms of that time, certainly there were other, Christian offshoots that were dominant, but I won't digress, too much on those, at least not right now. And so there was a political drive from the very beginning to also diffuse, distinguish, exterminate voodoo and the belief in the practice, and where it could not be destroyed, certainly to turn it into a horror story, turn it into Halloween, turn it into pop culture in a way that can be entertaining and laughed at or feared for entertainment's sake. So in the earliest of 20th century pop culture, sensational claims that Black people engaged in human sacrifice and cannibalism formed a major component of US imperialism. We saw bits of that in vampire movies too, where they started introducing, Dracula's wives, consuming the baby out of the doctor's bag, and other forms of, wicked imagery to disengage the populace from a growing interest in not just voodoo at that time, but even Abraham Lincoln's generation was consumed with psychics, seances, ghosts, and the like. So these negative portrayals, these bastardizations became prominent throughout the culture. And when the US sent forces to occupy nations with large populations of people of African descent, particularly Cuba, Haiti, the US media claimed that the civilizing presence was necessary to stop these barbaric practices that were allegedly taking place. Such accusations were largely exaggerated and in some cases entirely fabricated. Rather, as is argued in the document Voodoo, there were merely racist justifications for military invasions and imperial dominance. And I am going to share the author's name who wrote Voodoo, The History of a Racial Slur, who wrote Voodoo, another document, who wrote Voodoo Cult of Detroit. I'll share it towards the end of the show. So in the 1930s, the police, the media, even scholars referred to the group of Black Muslims who would eventually become known as the Nation of Islam as the Voodoo Cult of Detroit. Some of you whose parents, grandparents, maybe great grandparents, depending on how young you are, were alive in the 60s, the 50s, 60s, 70s, who were introduced to the Ansuru, who used to wear all white Muslim attire. Mostly at that time, it was primarily a fraternal order, all men, and they introduced, hand dip incense and body oil at the same time as soul music and I'm Black and I'm proud and the civil rights movement was happening, and they were also characterized as a voodoo cult. And this nickname came about because one of the FOI's alleged members, Robert Harris, killed his tenant on an altar in his home and claimed that he committed the murder as an offering to Allah. And these allegations about voodoo sacrifices had an enormous impact on Black Muslims in Detroit, causing them to change their name, their leader, and the location of their headquarters. And despite the name, voodoo dolls are not actually derived from religions of Haiti, Louisiana, or West Africa that have been labeled as voodoo and wicked. Instead, these dolls are based primarily on European concepts of witchcraft. Long before the Atlantic trade and any significant contacts between Europe and West Africa, Europeans used curses, paintings, sculptured images of people to cause individuals harm in the way that so-called voodoo dolls are used in popular culture today. So maybe 6 shows back, maybe 5, I talked about the Democratic and Republican Party utilizing witchcraft and masking it as religion. I talked about the government of both the US and Russia utilizing and accessing and studying witchcraft, voodoo, telepathy, remote viewing, the like, well documented cases that continue to affect society at many different levels. But the minute a dark person, a brown person, a Creole person say voodoo, um, first we try and say, oh well, no, it's not them 4 O's, it's with the U. We religiousise it or try and bring so-called culture to it, or we just disavow it altogether and operate in the closet, and in the secret. And that still is happening today. I talk to at least one person a day in my consultations that we have this conversation. Disney's first ever Black princess was set in New Orleans. Many of the characters were very familiar to New Orleans characters and centers on a story about a voodoo curse. The villain, an evil voodoo doctor, Dr. Facilier, shadowed after me, the shadow man, who is helped by his friends on the other side, is also portrayed in the darkest, evilest, you know, with entertainment creative license, of course. The kids have to be able to laugh at it or, get a Halloween-like effect from it. And the film features voodoo skulls, drunken heads, shrunken heads, human skulls, and other uh, invidious stereotypes. After the devastating earthquakes in Haiti in 2010, many claimed the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, injuring and displacing many more because of the Haitian earthquake in 2010. Controversial pastor Pat Robertson publicly claimed that the disaster was God's retribution for Haitians practicing voodoo. And of course, he used 4 O's, referring to the famed voodoo ceremony at Bois Caimon, where leaders of the Haitian Revolution prayed for spiritual protection for the uprising. Pat Robertson alleged that Haitians had made a pact with the devil to claim their independence from France. And unfortunately, and particularly as a result of such stereotypes, voodoo devotees suffered discrimination and violence following the earthquake, in Haiti and other parts of the world. And the subsequent cholera outbreak was also attributed to voodoo. Additionally, devotees and scholars report that Christian missionaries who received much of the aid to help rebuild refused to give supplies to voodoo devotees and used the dire situation to coerce people to attend churches and to convert into Christianity or even Catholicism. And despite what Disney, Pat Robertson, and a slew of horror movies have said, devotees of Haitian voodoo and New Orleans voodoo do not worship the devil, never have. In fact, the devil does not even exist in the cosmology of most African diasporic religions. The notion that voodoo and other African diasporic religions center on devil worship is based on racism and religious prejudice dating back hundreds of years. And to justify slavery, colonization, white supremacy, and other atrocities against non-Christians, Europeans often argued that non-Christians, especially Africans, did not have religion, practice fetishism, and or worship the devil. I've talked in past shows about commonalities in rhetoric in white supremacists and some Black power circles. And you find that mixing of water with wine, especially with the internet. Some of you are, much more craftier with your words than I, much more craftier with your copy and paste and with your filters and your video adaptations than I. But you're still mixing water with wine for those who don't know and understand the truth, the traditions, and how it's documented. So Europeans often argue that we were certainly without religion, and many of you have adopted that misbelief, that miseducation. Certainly, we created religion. Certainly, we created the fetish, but certainly we are innate and inherently spiritual. And voodoo is inherently nature, universally, indigenous, aboriginally, universally, globally. inherently nature. So in cases where voodoo is an extremely racist terms, for centuries it was used to denigrate the spiritual practices of African descent and to argue that Black people were too superstitious for independence and self-governing. So there's a mixing of water and wine there. Um, they're not coming out and saying that it's in the DNA coding, but they're certainly suggesting it's intrinsic to indigenous Aboriginal people, Black indigenous people, and certainly African Americans throughout the Pan African diaspora. Determining all the social types that come with it continue to support harmful, deadly prejudice and violence against Haitian voodoo and other Pan African diasporic religious systems. Florida had the wherewithal to confront the US government in terms of actively operating in their systems, and particularly as it relates to Ebo and the use of animals in Ebo, and won their case, which affords Aboriginal and Indigenous practices to operate legally, but still politically, socially, relatively in secret, to protect the sacredness of the ceremonies for sure, but also to, you know, protect these ceremonies from, from the Karen of today. And so I choose to utilize voodoo with four O's, much like some of you choose to, re-originate, the B word. I don't have to agree with it, but some of you have accepted being, the bad baddie. Uh, some of you have accepted witch and don't seem to have a problem, navigating the shadow and the darkness when it comes to people's, visceral response to witch. It's not a judgment, it just is what it is. Some of you have reinvented, the N word, which personally I don't use. And I'm gonna share a secret. People who use it out of context, out of historic archaeological necessity in TikTok, I block y'all right off the jump. I don't even look at anything else y'all post or listen to anything else y'all talk to. But that's my personal preference. Some of y'all, don't have a problem with it. You've, befriended the word, if you will. So for me, voodoo, the four O's, is about maintaining the footprint of the Black, Indigenous, and the African American populace here in the US, who has often been denigrated, reduced to the lowest levels, if at all included, in the diasporic conversation about allegiance to, commitment to, adherence to, demonstration of Aboriginal practices that certainly originated in the motherland and then began to repopulate itself in the New World and certainly evolved no matter what soil it touched. It had to evolve, whether it was Brazil, Venezuela, Haiti, Panama, Puerto Rico, Santerio, Trinidad and Tobago, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, Georgia, Texas. It had to evolve. There's this telling that, you can't access authentication voodoo without being in Haiti. And I don't hear that as much in the last few years, post earthquakes and post, civil uprisings, where such a large populace of new Haitians are now in the so-called New World, are now in North America as opposed to Central America, or even the UK or other parts of the world. And certainly they are carrying the practice and the tradition with them. Certainly that rule applies in terms of access to resources. There are certain resources that have to be garnered from particular locations, particular regions, of the world. Even the Middle Passage forced a retranslation of plants, if you will, of herbology and herbal remedies and magic, as we had that which we carried over, in the very hair and possible fabric and hulls of the ships, but certainly hidden away in some of the cargo of the ships would have been seeding and possible regrowth of certain plants that we now associate as being, American, but have their roots in other parts of the world. Many of our so-called weeds, which are herbal remedies, uh, dandelion, bee balm, many other plants have their origins in Europe and made their way here also through many of these passages. So our necessity for uh, readapting nature and readapting to nature just evolved regionally based on where we would have been transplanted and then retransplanted to once we got on this side of the ocean. It's not very common that everyone stayed, put where they may have been uh, captured and enslaved. Certainly, we know tales now of people being, carted away for bad behavior or starting insurrections or escaping, and so that carried again knowledge, mysteries, secrets, stories, legends with them into new locations. So we've always had to practice, adapt the tradition from region to region. I dare say, even in Nigeria, what's done in Ogun is not the same as how it's done in Oshun. It's not the same as how it's done in Ile Ife. It's not the same from village to village. Much like, Jody Netta's gumbo might not taste like Empress Imani's gumbo. It might not taste like Sitio Dreams gumbo. It might not taste like my gumbo, but we could all be pulling from the same gumbo recipe. But somebody's going to like more hot than not. Somebody's going to like more spice than not. Somebody's going to want more seafood than not. Somebody's not going to want as diverse a mixture of meat, than not. Some of y'all just ain't fooling with the andouille, and others wouldn't have it without it. So these ethno-cultural practices and traditions certainly had a root, had a core, which can be documented in many cases globally back to its square root, if you will. But there's always that evolution of tradition of practice, even in highly constructed and protected initiatory systems like Lukumi, as it's done in Cuba, where these secrets, these mysteries, these practices are masked behind not just, for many of us, travel. Then there's the language for our non-Spanish speaking community. Then there's the Yoruba, and then there's the Yoruba that they're actually using in Lukumi. It's not a mirror reflection of everyday Yoruba. So you can't, Google translate it. You have to learn it, either word of mouth, the way it was done traditionally, or certainly all of your best book studying and mentorship has to involve a diversity of sources in order to get a clear understanding of what's being said, what's being conveyed, what's being passed down, what's being demonstrated. So people will go to Cuba or Haiti or Brazil or Puerto Rico, pick a place, and will then come back with their limited knowledge and say, well, what they're doing in Florida is not correct, or, well, your Isheshe doesn't quite mirror, what my initiatory practice was. And for those who are still learning or, you know, really have limited knowledge, you don't often understand what the argument is even about. So we have those new authors and new writers who are, you know, creating their own system. And as I've said in previous shows, do as you will, but call it what it is. Don't say it's voodoo with a U. Don't say it's voodoo with four O's. Don't say it's, you know, root word conjure. It's Yoruba. It's Akan. It's Ewe. It's, you know, Igbo. Um, without having that foundational key and that foundational information, which is contingence. That's not the word I'm looking for. Continuous. There's another word. Contiguous, I believe. It's continuous throughout its lineage. And so lineage in ATR linguistics is often a reference to not just bloodline or ancestry, but the bloodline ancestry of the practice and or tradition that one claims to be initiated in. So people start rattling off locations and regions and godparents and attendees, you know, to these ceremonies to validate the authenticity of the practice, of the tradition. So, you know, I got it from my mom and them. Is often not enough in these circles. Um, it's in my blood, but nobody talked about it. It's often not enough in these circles. Not to be claiming practitioner, not to be claiming in many cases reader, even. And let's understand in the school of spiritual gifts, reading is just one language usage of divination. So even divination is far more complex than pop culture will often give it respect to. Certainly in a free America, quotation marks, free America and free enterprise. You know, we walk into a bookstore, a crystal shop, and you see some cute tarot cards and you buy them. But there's no one there to mentor you in making sense of what they are or what they mean or what they're saying. Certainly the individual independent author who can now design with AI and create your own deck of tarot cards and pop it up on Etsy can certainly put their own meaning into the cards, may even create their own system for usage of the cards, but call it that. When we say tarot, then there is a mathematical, scientific, astrological, historic root to that. I often share the book, The Secret Teachings of the Ages. The Secret Teachings of the Ages. This book can be found free um, on a site. I believe it's called Sacred. Oh wow, what's the name of that site? Is it Sacred Books? No, that's not it. Give me a second. I'm typing and talking at the same time. Let me type in the book. The Secret Teachings of the Ages. And in this book is, I mean, mysteries of the globe from Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Middle East, Europe. It covers everything from religions, individual independent religions, to secret societies, secret practices within many of these ethno-cultural practices and traditions. The author is Manly P. Hall. The book is called The Secret Teachings of the Ages. I'm still looking for the website. I hope that they haven't shadow banned it. It used to be one of the first entries that would come up. Okay, here we go. I had my language wrong. The website where you can find it for free is called Sacred Text. Sacred-text with an S.com. sacred texts. And The Secret Teaching of the Ages is one of the books that can be found there for free. And it covers, again, gods of the antiquity, the life and teachings of Thoth Hermes, um, the initiation of the pyramid, Isis, the Virgin of the World, certainly astrology, astronomy, the sun, the zodiac, the Bimbine Tablet of Isis, wonders of antiquity, the life and philosophy of Pythagoras, Pythagorean mathematics, the human body in symbolism, the Hermetic legend, Pythagorean theology and music and color, fish, insects, animals, reptiles, and birds, flowers, plants, fruits, trees, stones, metals, gems. It's all encompassing. I once upon a time had an original hardbound tabletop copy, and it was stolen from me in Milwaukee. I'll retell that story another day. But all of the material can be found, absent many of the colorful illustrations and pictures that were in the version that I had. There are some illustrations within the sacred text version, but they are limited in many ways. I have not seen a library version in some years, so maybe in your local libraries you can also find maybe some of the older versions. Queen Sheba said it's on YouTube. The book or the subject matter we're talking about. Okay, because that answer would apply to both. Certainly, people are in books and mentoring and you know YouTubing and TikToking. But again, even in that space, just like TV, you know, which is a crystal, you've got to separate the shadow. You have to separate light from darkness, truth from fiction. Um, you know, the macrocosm from the microcosm, and give that some definition. Thank you, Alexis Williams, and welcome. And welcome, Queen Sheba, if I didn't already say so. Jody Netta, those who are listening and viewing who I can't immediately see. Dr. Cassie, thank you so much for continuing to listen, long time listener and participant in the show. Caller at area code 475. We certainly appreciate you. If you have a question or a comment, certainly press the number 1 on your telephone keypad. I will be more than happy to unmute your mic and bring you into the conversation. So I began this long series of hoodoo, root work, conjure, voodoo, with 4 O's or with the U's in relationship to revolution, in relationship to resistance, and certainly to bring it into context. I've been immersed in everything, Middle East and everything global, and everything Israel and Palestine and everything shady and underhanded, at the governmental level since October. And understanding how this magic, this knowledge, to include witchcraft and conjure, has been active in politics for some time, and how well documented it is now with the Freedom of Information Act, that this magic, for lack of words, to speak universally, is being used among us, but also upon us, often from sources that we have been programmed to disassociate when we think about magic. The church, we've been taught to disassociate the church from magic. Oh no, not the good church, folks, not the saints. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Very popular demographic in terms of who's calling, communicating with psychics, readers, practitioners, the like. Yes, ma'am. Governmental facilities, governmental organizations, now well documented. As early as World War I and World War II, the usage of so-called occult, quantum metaphysical knowledge, math, science, practice at the governmental level for control, as weaponry, as defense in relationship to remote viewing and the like. Certainly, if we know the government was willing to play around with remote viewing, they were certainly willing to play around with other forms of dark magic and witchcraft, certainly. And so my question stands, what are we doing beyond fighting to survive, fighting to get our finances untangled, to get our relationships untangled, to sort of maintain, the status quo and the lifestyles that we've gotten we've gotten accustomed to, particularly in modern context. We could all be under bombardment at any moment. We could all be under, emergency at any moment, whether by some, negative, evil, wicked action of humanity, or by the actions of nature itself and nature's ability to sort of push back against much of what humanity has done to it. And so we are not only accessing nature, spirit for survival, to live, it is certainly at the foundation of what makes us human. But what degree are we actively utilizing it equally to the other forces that are using it against us for mind control, for appropriating our understanding of a thing to force a particular choice upon us, a particular direction upon us. And the presidential, scenario is no greater example of bringing all of society, no matter what you believe or understand, sort of to this bipolar crossroads of red and blue, black and white, fiction and reality, what's rational, reasonable, logical, quote unquote, common sense versus, imaginary, creative imagination. And this audience is well aware of the power of creative imagination, but also the danger of creative imagination. Anything you can imagine right now in your head is already an active reality in another dimensional space for which we as humans are gifted with with the ER, and intra, with the RA, access to intra-dimensional space. So whatever you can conceive in your consciousness is an active reality. And it can then be brought into our physical, waking, material reality. We seem to understand that clearly when we think of fear, anxiety. Some of the best authors, fear writers, horror writers, can use psychology without the boogeyman, without the ghost, to create scenarios of fear. But it's a natural to being human. The worst things that we can fear, that we can imagine, that we can dream up, certainly become real intra-dimensionally when you begin to sweat, when the hairs start to stand up on your arm. You're having a physical, visceral,
90
material
seconds.
response to what is otherwise imagination, mind, consciousness, spirit realm scenarios. So certainly we live in between the worlds of what we want and what we don't want. And it is our choice. It is in our choosing It is in our activities to grow and develop the realities in which mirror
60 seconds.
our best interests. I'm so honored and grateful for each and every one of you who continue to support me and join me here live each and every day at high noon U.S. Central Standard Time. I invite you all, please, I invite you all, for my long-term listeners, I beg, I'm not that expensive. Please come on my YouTube platform and join, subscribe as a paid subscriber to my YouTube platform. It supports all of my podcasts, both in the YouTube space, but also in TikTok and various other spaces where I often show up, and certainly where we're being heard and listened to. Facebook, thank you, Facebook, for doing the right thing. Some of you know they played around with my Facebook again. You know, these people who are duplicating my identity in social media, beware, be careful of my name with punctuation that I don't put there. Beware of profiles that look like me but don't sound like me. I know it's 1 o'clock. I know. Be careful of 4 eyes and multiple letters in my name. It's not me, it's the fraudsters. It's the fraudsters. So yeah, they came from my Facebook. It usually happens about once a year, but Facebook is getting quicker on fixing it. So my Facebook is back up and running. All is a blessing. But I look forward to meeting you again at high noon U.S. Central Standard Time in this shared sacred space again on tomorrow. Greetings, Savannah. Peace and blessings. She's going to be with me tomorrow. Okay. What you can do, Savannah, beloved, is to shoot me an email, and I will be more than happy to assist you in your request. Send me an email at Divine Prince, DIVINE, PRINCE, at houseofthedivineprince.com. Divine Prince at houseofthedivineprince.com. And I will respond to you, Savannah. Even though it's last minute, I'll respond to you. All is truly and indeed a blessing. Now, if I'm on the go, I might respond from any number of my personal email addresses, but it will have my footprint in it. And more than likely, thedivineprince@gmail.com, which is connected directly to my Google Maps profile. Thedivineprince@gmail.com is connected to my Gmail profile. So I look forward to seeing you and possibly being with you, beloved. Great day to you as well, Diakia. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Great day to you and yours. Enjoy your day. Have a prosperous day. Have a joyous day. Have an active day. And if it is your day, have a peaceful and restful day. Until next time, all is truly and indeed a blessing. Ashe, oh, ashe.
Congo Square. The Omas Indians prepared this place for us centuries before our arrival. A sacred spot where corn festivals were celebrated. The Omas Indians prepared this place for us.
Okay, my apologies, Dakita.
Centuries before our arrival.
Dakita.
Congo Square, a sacred spot where corn festivals were celebrated. And as the colonizers came, our hosts, the Omas Indians, they pushed aside our hosts. The colonizers came and pushed aside our hosts and introduced us in chains. And by the late 1700s, we somehow, recognizing the sacredness of Les Places de Congo, we somehow, and the how of our somehow persuasive methodologies is not clear at this moment. The how is not clear. How our persuasive methodologies work is not clear at this moment, but nevertheless, even as slaves, we crafted and created a space where we could be free to be we. And thusly we countered the sacrilegiousness of the French, giving great homage to our ancestors as well as giving praise and thanks to our red-blooded brothers and sisters. This is an oral libation toast to Congo Square, to Native Americans, to our ancestors who made a circle out of a square and gave us a way to save ourselves from the transformatory ugliness of America, which refuses to recognize the spirituality of life, which refuses to recognize the spirituality of life and celebrates death with crosses, double and triple crosses, the middle passage, the Christ cross, Christianity, the double cross, and capitalism, the ultimate triple coup de grace cross of our captivity. But the terror of crosses notwithstanding, we sang, we beat, we be, we was and is. Hail Congo Square. Congo Square. Our African gods have not been obliterated. They have merely retreated inside the beat of us. Inside the beat of us. Our African gods have not been obliterated. They have merely retreated inside the beat of us until we are ready to release them into a world that we recreate. A world held by the beating of black heart drum. Heartbeat, at this place, beat, heartbeat, beat, we beating place in new world space, being in place in new world, preserving our ancient taste. Our dance is the God walk, our music the God talk. First thing we do, let's get together, circle ourselves into community. No beginning, no end, connected together and singing, ringing, singing in a ring. Second, let's be original, aboriginal. Be what we were before we became what we are. Be bambula dance, be banza music, and sing song words which have no English translation. Third, let us remember. Let us remember never to forget. Even when we can't remember the specifics, we must retain the essentials. Let us remember never to forget. Even when we can't remember the specifics, we must retain the essentials. The bounce, the blood flow, the feel, the spirit grow, energy. Must retain and pass on the essential usness that others want to dissipate with out of us. Whoa! But no matter how much of us they prohibit, no matter how much of us they prohibit, deep inside us is us. Deep inside us is us. remains us inside and needs only the beat to set us free. The beat to free us. It is morning, a Sunday, a field without shade, but dark with the people black of us in various shades, eclipsing the sun without elegance. We are centuries later now, and still this sacred ground calls us to remember, to be. We are centuries later now, and still this sacred ground calls us to remember, to be. Beat Congo Square. Be Congo Square. Beat. 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 Congo Square. Beat. Congo Square. Beat. 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 Remember. Remember. Remember.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.